Imagine this. On the day of their divorce, the husband marries his mistress, leaving his wife behind, broken, betrayed, and abandoned. But what happens next will shock you. What if I told you that the woman he left was about to turn the tables in a way no one saw coming? A way that would leave him begging for her help and her smiling, knowing she held the power all along. Stay tuned, because this is a story of revenge, redemption, and a twist you won't believe. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of monitors. Greg lay in the bed, looking smaller than Claire had ever remembered him. His once proud stature, full of energy and confidence, now seemed diminished. His face, drawn and pale, barely resembled the man who had left her years ago. Claire stood by the window, her back to him, the light of the afternoon sun casting long shadows in the room. Her expression was calm, almost serene, though her heart felt the weight of the years that had passed. The irony of it all was too sharp to ignore. He had left her for a younger woman, believing that she was the key to his happiness, but now it was Claire who stood as the one person he needed most. It was almost as if the roles had reversed. 3 years ago, Claire had been living a life she thought was perfect. Married to Greg, a successful lawyer, and living in a spacious home with plans for a family. It all came crashing down on one cold winter day when she found out about the affair. It wasn't just the affair that broke her heart. It was the coldness with which Greg left. He moved in with her, a younger, more vibrant woman who seemed to have everything Claire wasn't. The betrayal was one thing, but the abandonment that followed left Claire lost and broken for a time. For months, Claire struggled to get out of bed in the mornings. She felt like a shell of herself, her mind constantly racing with thoughts of what had gone wrong. She questioned everything, her marriage, herself, even her worth. But in time, with the help of therapy and support from her close friends, Claire began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, but she slowly got her life back on track. She started her own practice as a relationship counselor, using her pain to help others navigate through their own heartbreaks. She even found a small peace in the quiet solitude of her life, focusing on her work and her growth. Meanwhile, Greg seemed to be thriving. The younger woman, Heather, was everything Claire wasn't: carefree, spontaneous, and seemingly flawless. Greg seemed to fall deeper and deeper into this new life, convinced that he had made the right choice. He was happy, or so it appeared. Claire, on the other hand, buried her pain and focused on herself. She learned to love her own company and found a kind of freedom in her independence. She began to see the world through new eyes, more appreciative of her own strength. But as time went on, the cracks in Greg's perfect new life started to show. His once thriving career began to falter, and Heather, who had seemed like the perfect match for him, grew distant. Claire heard the rumors about Heather's impatience, about her quick temper, about how Greg wasn't as happy as he had claimed. Claire listened from afar, feeling a strange mix of empathy and relief. She was no longer the one who had been left behind. She had moved on, and in a way, so had Greg. Yet the knowledge of his struggles brought a sense of satisfaction she wasn't proud of. Months passed before the news arrived. Greg had been diagnosed with a serious illness, one that left him needing constant care. The doctors told him he wouldn't be able to manage on his own for long. Heather, overwhelmed by the situation, had left, unable to handle the burden of caring for him. Greg, once the man who had everything, now found himself completely alone. His phone calls to friends and family were met with excuses. His former colleagues had all moved on. The only person left who seemed willing to help was Claire. It was a strange situation for Claire. The man who had betrayed her, who had hurt her more than anyone else ever could, was now asking for help. It didn't seem right to ignore him, but neither did it feel fair for her to just rush back to him with open arms. She thought of the years that had passed, the pain that had slowly faded, and the life she had built for herself. It was clear now that Greg had made a mistake, but Claire wasn't sure if he understood the magnitude of it or if he ever would. As she walked into his apartment, the smell of antiseptic and loneliness filled the air. Greg was sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at the city, a shadow of the man he once was. When he saw her, his face lit up with a mixture of relief and guilt. "Claire," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have never—" His words faltered as she set her bag down by the door. "I know," Claire said quietly, cutting him off before he could continue, "but you don't need to apologize anymore. We've both moved on from that part of our lives." Greg's eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "I didn't think I'd ever be in this position. I always thought I was the one who would be okay, that I'd be the one in control. But now, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this." Claire took a deep breath. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired of the past, tired of being the one who had to carry the weight of their history. "You can't fix what's been broken, Greg. But I'll help you with what I can. I'm not here for you the way you might want me to be. I'm here because you need help, and that's what I do." For the first time since their divorce, Claire saw the vulnerability in Greg's eyes, and it was not the kind of vulnerability she had expected. It wasn't the sorrow of a man who had lost the love of his life. It was the despair of a man who had chased everything, only to realize too late that he had lost it all. His new life, his younger wife, the career he had once been so proud of, none of it mattered anymore. He was alone, and in his eyes, Claire was his last hope. As the days passed, Claire found herself caring for him in ways she hadn't anticipated. She helped with his medications, arranged for home care, and even made sure he had food. It wasn't out of love, but out of an understanding that Greg was a man who had once been part of her life, and now, in his weakness, she could offer him compassion without letting it pull her back into the past. She kept her distance, emotionally and physically. He needed care, not love, and that was the line Claire drew. Greg, on the other hand, seemed to grow closer to her every day. He would reminisce about the old days, about their vacations, the way she used to laugh at his terrible jokes. But each time, Claire steered the conversation back to his health, his progress, his treatment. She didn't allow herself to get lost in the nostalgia he seemed so eager to create. It was a different kind of relationship now, one built on respect for the person they were, not the person they had been together. But Greg's dependence on her started to affect him in unexpected ways. As Claire continued to help, he began to see her in a light he hadn't before. There was no longer the younger, more vibrant woman he had left behind. In front of him stood a woman who had grown, who had learned from the pain, and who no longer needed him. For the first time in years, Greg began to see the true strength of Claire, and the realization hit him hard. He had left behind the one person who had always had his back, the one person who truly understood him. One evening, as Claire helped him into bed, Greg looked up at her with an expression that mixed shame and awe. "You were right," he said softly. "I made a terrible mistake. I thought I could find happiness elsewhere, but I didn't realize that I was throwing away everything that really mattered. You were the one who truly knew me, Claire." For a moment, Claire stood frozen, her hand on his shoulder. She had heard these words before, but now they were different. There was no bitterness in his voice, no attempt to shift the blame. It was simply a man facing the consequences of his choices, with no one left but the woman he had hurt the most. Claire exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. "I'm not here to be your savior, Greg," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here because you need help. But you need to understand something. I don't need you anymore. I did once, but not now, and you're going to have to find a way to live with that." Greg nodded, understanding the finality in her words. He had made his choices, and now it was Claire who had the power. The story had come full circle. The man who had left her was now completely dependent on her, and she, with quiet strength, had taken control of the narrative. The next few days blurred into each other as Claire continued to manage Greg's care. She'd arrive early in the morning, prepared with a list of things to do, from overseeing his medications to making sure he ate properly. At times it felt mechanical, almost like a job she had been hired for. There were moments of silence between them, awkward pauses that reminded Claire of the distance that had grown over the years. Every now and then Greg would try to engage her in conversation about the past, but Claire deflected. She didn't need to revisit the painful history they had left behind. She had moved on. Yet there was something about his presence that made her reflect on how far she'd come, how far they both had come from the broken people they used to be. Despite the practical nature of their interactions, there were flashes of old memories. Greg, though weak and fragile, still had the ability to charm her with his smile, a smile that once made her feel like the center of his world. But that was before the betrayal, before he had left her for someone younger, someone who seemed to have everything she hadn't. The resentment, once sharp and consuming, was now dulled, like a scar that had healed but left a faint mark. Claire could acknowledge the hurt without allowing it to control her anymore. She had worked through it, and helping him now felt like nothing more than a duty. As the days turned into weeks, Greg's health seemed to improve, at least physically. But emotionally, he was still adrift. He didn't talk about Heather much, though Claire could tell he was thinking about her. There were times when he would stare out the window, lost in thought, his mind clearly elsewhere. He often spoke of regrets, about how he had thought that leaving Claire would bring him happiness, that he could start over with someone new. But now, facing the stark reality of his illness, he saw the truth. He had made a choice, and that choice had come at a price that wasn't just about the money or the career. It was about losing the one person who had loved him unconditionally. One evening, as Claire helped Greg to the couch, he reached out and touched her arm. His touch was soft, tentative, almost as if he was afraid she might pull away. "Claire," he said, his voice raspy from days of little use, "I don't think I've ever really apologized for what I did. I don't know if I ever could, but I need you to know that I regret it, all of it. Leaving you, thinking I could just replace what we had with someone else. I was wrong." Claire paused, her hands still on his shoulders, as she helped him adjust. She could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them. It was as if he had finally come to understand the consequences of his actions. For the first time, he wasn't making excuses. He wasn't trying to shift the blame. He was simply acknowledging the hurt he had caused. "I know, Greg," Claire replied, her voice steady, "but that's not something I need from you anymore. I've made peace with it. You made your choice, and I made mine. And now, we both have to live with the consequences." His eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Claire thought she saw a flicker of the man he used to be, the man she had once loved. But just as quickly, the moment passed, and Greg turned away, looking out the window again. He had his regrets, but there was nothing more Claire could give him. She had given him the chance to be a better man, to be the husband she needed him to be. But he had chosen another path, and now that path had led him back to her, broken and alone. Over the next few days, Greg seemed to retreat further into himself. His vulnerability made Claire uncomfortable at times, but she reminded herself that this wasn't about her. She wasn't here to fix him or to rekindle anything from their past. She was here to help, to care for him in the way she would any patient. The line was clear, even if it wasn't always easy to maintain. It was one afternoon, as she was helping him with his physical therapy, that Greg said something that stopped her in her tracks. "I never understood how strong you were, Claire. I thought I was the one who had it all figured out, that I was the one in control. But I see now that I was wrong. You've handled everything so much better than I ever could have. I don't know how you do it." Claire didn't respond right away. She focused on his movements, helping him stretch his legs, guiding him through the exercises with the same care and attention she would give any of her patience. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't pride that swelled within her chest, but something deeper, something quieter. It was the recognition of her own strength. The strength that had been tested over and over again, first by his betrayal and then by the life she had to rebuild. She had risen from the ashes of their broken marriage, and in doing so, she had become someone far stronger than the woman who had once believed her world revolved around him. Greg's dependency on her, though increasingly obvious, wasn't the only thing that weighed on Claire. She found herself thinking about the choices they had both made, the paths they had taken. She had let go of him, not because she didn't love him anymore, but because she loved herself more. She had chosen to heal, to move forward. And now, as he relied on her more and more, Claire began to realize just how much he had taken her for granted in the past. The bitterness that had once consumed her, the rage and the sorrow, had all been replaced by something else, clarity. It was as if, in caring for Greg, she was also caring for the person she had become. She didn't need his apology, his regret, or his affection. She had learned to be complete on her own. Still, Greg wasn't the only one who had changed. Claire's own transformation wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. She had rebuilt her life on her own terms, and in the process, she had found peace in her own strength. As Claire helped him back to bed that night, Greg whispered once more, "I've hurt you, Claire, and I don't expect anything from you, but I want you to know that I never stopped caring about you. I was just too blind to see it back then." For a moment, Claire hesitated. She could have said something that would acknowledge his words, something that might have given him the closure he was seeking. But she didn't. She simply nodded, offering him a smile that was neither warm nor cold. It was a smile that said everything she needed it to. She had let go, and now it was his turn to find his way forward, just as she had found hers. And with that, Claire left the room, the door clicking softly behind her. The man who had once been her entire world was now a part of her past, and the life she had rebuilt was all that remained. The following days passed in a quiet rhythm, like the calm before a storm. Claire continued to help Greg, but something had changed between them. The silence that had once been heavy with unresolved tension had shifted. It was now filled with a strange sense of mutual understanding. Greg, once so eager to fill the void in his life with distractions, now seemed to be searching for something deeper. He would sit for hours staring out of the window, lost in thought. At times his gaze would follow Claire as she moved about the house, and she could feel his eyes on her, searching for some answer that she couldn't provide. One evening, as she prepared dinner for both of them, Greg spoke again. His voice, though still weak, carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "Claire," he began, his voice tentative, "do you ever think about what we could have been? If I hadn't left, if I'd stayed, do you think things could have been different?" Claire didn't respond immediately. The question hung in the air like a fragile thread, almost too delicate to touch. She had heard that question before, in different forms, from different people, the what-ifs. But Claire had stopped asking those questions a long time ago. She had accepted that the past was gone, that it was no longer hers to rewrite. "You know the answer to that, Greg," she replied quietly, not turning to face him. "You can't change the past. All we have is the present, and even that is fleeting. What happened, happened. What's important now is how we deal with it, how we move forward." Greg's silence spoke volumes. He looked down at his hands, fingers trembling slightly, as he rested them on his lap. The realization was dawning on him that his past choices were irreversible, and that Claire, the woman he had taken for granted, was no longer the same woman he had left behind. She had found her own way, her own strength, and now she was the one who held the power, not him. As Claire set the table, the weight of his words lingered, but she couldn't allow herself to dwell on them. She had her own life now. She had her own purpose. She had a future that didn't involve him. The man who had once been the love of her life was now a shadow of the person he had been. She was no longer a part of his world in the way he had once made her believe. She was a caretaker, a friend, but not the woman who would return to the past with him. Later that night, as Claire tucked Greg into bed, she felt a strange pull to ask him something. The question had been nagging at her for days, but she had kept it to herself, unsure if it was something she really wanted to know. But now, standing by his bedside, she felt compelled to ask. "Greg," she said, her voice steady but soft, "why did you really leave? Was it just about her, or was it about something else? Something that had been wrong with us long before she came along?" Greg's eyes, already clouded with regret, seemed to cloud even further. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just her. It was everything. I was lost. I didn't know who I was anymore. I thought I needed something new, something different. I thought I could escape from what I felt was a life that had become too predictable. But I was wrong. I was running from myself, and in the process, I lost you." The honesty in his words was unexpected, and Claire felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Sympathy, not love, not even pity, but a quiet understanding of the man he had become. She had always known that Greg wasn't a monster. He wasn't evil or cruel. He was just lost. And he had made choices based on fear and insecurity, choices that ultimately led to his downfall. "I know," Claire said, her voice gentle. "I know you weren't happy, but leaving didn't fix anything. It just broke everything, for both of us." Greg nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I can't undo the damage I've done. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope that somehow, in all this, I can make it right." Claire didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. There was no making it right. The past was gone, and nothing could change that. She had long ago accepted that her journey wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation with Greg. It was about finding herself again, about learning to stand on her own 2 feet, even when the world around her seemed to crumble. That night, as Claire left Greg's room and turned off the lights, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She had given him what he needed, honesty, care, and understanding. But in the end, it wasn't about Greg. It was about her. She had learned to let go. She had learned to move forward. And that was where the story truly began. The days grew colder as winter took hold, and Claire found herself slipping into a routine she had never imagined. She visited Greg daily, checking on his progress, keeping track of his medication, ensuring he ate, and helping him with exercises to rebuild his strength. He had become less a man she once loved, and more a patient she was responsible for. It was strange, almost unsettling, how easily the emotional lines blurred, and yet Claire felt no resentment. She wasn't sure if it was the years of healing that had passed or the simple fact that she had let go of the past, but she no longer saw Greg through the lens of bitterness. There were moments when he would sit in silence, watching her as she moved through the house. Sometimes he would ask about her day, and Claire would answer with the same care she offered her patience. But no matter how hard Greg tried, there was always a distance between them, a barrier she had carefully constructed between them over the years, a protective wall that kept her from getting too close, from reopening old wounds. Yet, despite the unspoken boundary she had set, Claire couldn't help but notice the way Greg would linger in her presence. He seemed to need her now in ways that were more profound than the physical care she provided. His dependency was becoming more emotional than anything else. He relied on her for comfort, for support, for companionship, things he had once taken for granted. And with each passing day, Claire saw a change in him. The man who had left her, the man who had chosen someone else over their shared life, was now the one turning to her in his time of need. One afternoon, as Claire helped him into a chair by the window, Greg asked her something that surprised her. "Do you ever wonder if we could start over?" His voice was hesitant, his eyes searching her face for some sign of hope. "I know it's ridiculous, but sometimes I wonder if we could try again. Maybe not the way we were, but something new. A new beginning, Claire. What do you think?" Claire paused, her fingers still on the arms of his wheelchair. She hadn't expected the question, and for a moment she didn't know how to answer. The idea of starting over, of erasing the years of hurt and betrayal, felt impossible. But at the same time, she saw the rawness in Greg's eyes, the desperation, the need to repair what had been broken. And she realized for the first time that this wasn't about her needing him. This was about him needing her. "I don't know, Greg," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with a quiet uncertainty. "I've thought about it too. I've thought about how different things could have been if we had made different choices. But the truth is, what happened between us can't just be erased. You can't undo the damage. We can't just pretend it never happened." Greg nodded slowly, his face falling, the disappointment visible in his eyes. He had hoped for a different answer, but Claire wasn't the woman who would go back to the past no matter how much Greg wished it. She had learned painfully that trying to revive a dead relationship was never the answer. The love they once shared had withered away, replaced by something far more complex, an understanding that they had both changed too much to ever return to what they were. "It's not about forgetting, though," Greg murmured, almost as if to himself. "I don't want to forget. I guess I'm asking if we could be something different. Not what we were, but maybe something more, something where we both get what we need." Claire took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over her. She had lived with the belief that Greg's betrayal had been the end of them, the end of everything they had built together. But now, sitting there, looking at the man who had once been her partner, she realized something. Their past had been filled with moments of joy, of laughter, of love. But those moments had been tainted by his decisions, by the way he had chosen to leave her when she needed him most. "I'm not sure what that would look like," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not the person I was when you left, and I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine. What happened, what you did, it changed everything. But I don't hate you anymore, Greg. I've let that go." Greg's eyes softened as he looked at her, the regret in his gaze more evident than ever. "I've hurt you in ways I'll never be able to make up for," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to know that I see you now. I see the woman you've become. I see how strong you are. And I realize that I never really saw that before. I took you for granted, Claire, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for that." For the first time in weeks, Claire allowed herself to feel something other than duty. She felt sadness, yes, but not the crushing sadness of the past. It was the sadness of seeing a man she had once loved, a man who had hurt her deeply, finally come to terms with his mistakes. And in that moment, she realized something else. She had long forgiven him, not for his sake, but for her own. Holding on to anger and resentment would only keep her tied to a past that no longer had any power over her. "I don't need your forgiveness, Greg," Claire said, her voice firm but kind. "What I needed was for you to see me, to see who I've become. And I think you're starting to—" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Greg sat in his chair, his head lowered, lost in thought. Claire stood, her hands resting on the back of his chair, allowing the silence to stretch out between them. There was no immediate resolution, no promise that they would somehow find their way back to each other. But there was something else, something that had been missing for years: understanding. It wasn't love, not in the way it had once been, but it was enough. In that quiet moment, Claire knew that she had made the right choice. She had let go of the past, not just for her own peace, but for the possibility of a future, one where she could be free of the hurt, free of the need for closure. She had found her own strength, and now it was Greg's turn to find his. She would be there to help him, but she was no longer the woman who needed him to make her whole. She was whole on her own, and that for Claire was enough. As the weeks continued to pass, the dynamic between Claire and Greg remained a careful balance of responsibility and distance. Greg's physical health improved gradually, though he still needed constant care and attention. Claire, with her background in therapy, had no problem helping him with his physical rehabilitation. But there was always a lingering sense that something deeper, something more emotional, had been left unsaid between them. Greg's gratitude was palpable, yet he still carried the weight of his mistakes, a burden that made him seem older than his years. One afternoon, while Claire was helping Greg with his exercises, he brought up something that had been bothering him for a while. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady but edged with uncertainty. "I know you've moved on, Claire. You've built a life without me, and I respect that. But I can't help wondering, do you ever miss what we had? I mean, before everything fell apart, before I made such a mess of everything?" Claire paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. It wasn't the first time he had asked her this question, but this time there was something different in his tone. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It wasn't a desperate attempt to undo the past. It was more like a genuine curiosity, a yearning for some kind of closure that he couldn't seem to find. She looked at him, meeting his eyes for the first time in days, and for a brief moment, the old feelings stirred within her, the memories of their laughter, their shared moments, the love that once existed between them. But they were just memories now, beautiful but distant. She had long ago come to terms with the fact that their past was just that, the past. "I won't lie and say I don't think about the good times," Claire replied, her voice soft yet firm. "We had some great moments, Greg, but we also had our problems, problems that we couldn't fix, problems that you chose to ignore until they were too big to handle." Greg's gaze faltered for a moment, and Claire could see the guilt swirling in his eyes. He knew she was right. He had ignored the cracks in their relationship, thinking that he could escape them by finding someone new, by running away. But life had a way of making sure those cracks caught up with you, no matter how fast you ran. "I've hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I don't know if I'll ever be able to make it right. But I need you to know that I see everything now. I see how I failed you, how I took you for granted. I can't undo that, but I want you to understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I was just lost." Claire felt a pang in her chest as she watched him, the man she had once loved, finally admitting the truth. There was no more defensiveness, no more excuses, just raw honesty. It was a side of Greg she hadn't seen in years, and it made her wonder if, perhaps, he had been waiting for this moment all along, waiting for her to finally see him, not as the man who had abandoned her, but as the man who had been broken in his own way. "I know you were lost," Claire said, her voice steady. "But you weren't the only one. I was lost too. When you left, I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know how to live without you. But over time I learned that I didn't need you to be whole. I learned that I could rebuild, that I could stand on my own, and that's what I've done." Greg's eyes softened, and for a moment Claire saw something in him that hadn't been there before. It wasn't pity, and it wasn't even remorse. It was a quiet respect, a recognition of her strength, of her resilience. He understood now that she had not only survived the betrayal, but had come out stronger because of it. He had thought in his arrogance that he was the one who had it all figured out, but Claire had learned long before he had that life wasn't about escaping pain. It was about confronting it and growing from it. "I'm proud of you," Greg said, the words seeming to come from a place of deep sincerity. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know that. I see how far you've come, and I admire you more than I've ever let on." Claire didn't know how to respond to that. She had spent so many years waiting for this kind of acknowledgement, but now, hearing it from him, it didn't bring the relief she had expected. Instead, it was just a moment of clarity. Greg had finally seen her, truly seen her, but the reality was that it was too late for them. They were no longer the people they once were. They were no longer the couple who had dreamt of a life together. They were just two people who had once loved each other, but had now gone down different paths. "I've had to forgive you, Greg," Claire said after a long pause, "but forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It just means letting go of the need for revenge, for closure, for a second chance. I've found peace in that. And that's something I need you to understand." Greg nodded, his expression a mixture of acceptance and sadness. He wasn't ready to let go of the idea that he could somehow make everything right, but Claire knew that he would have to. She had already done the work of letting go, of accepting the past for what it was. Now it was his turn. For the first time since their reunion, Claire felt a sense of finality. The tension between them had dissolved, replaced by a quiet understanding. There was no more anger, no more bitterness, just two people finally acknowledging the truth that their past was gone and that the only thing left to do was to move forward separately. As Claire stood up to leave the room, she glanced back at Greg one last time. His eyes were closed, his face soft in sleep, and in that moment she realized that she was no longer waiting for anything from him. She had everything she needed within herself. And for the first time in a long time, Claire was truly free. The following weeks felt like a slow unfolding of a new chapter in Claire's life. She continued to care for Greg, but there was a noticeable shift in their interactions. No longer was she haunted by the ghosts of their past. No longer was she the woman who waited for him to come back. She had become the woman who stood on her own, who had learned to live without him in a way that didn't feel like survival, but rather like thriving. Greg's health continued to improve, and while Claire was still part of his daily routine, she began to step back a little more. Her presence no longer felt like a lifeline for him. Instead, it was more like an occasional reminder of the person he had once taken for granted. As the days went by, she felt her own life calling to her, tugging her away from the past and into something new. The practice she had built for herself was thriving, and she found herself increasingly focused on the patients she helped, the lives she touched, and the work that brought her purpose. One afternoon, as Claire was leaving Greg's apartment, he stopped her at the door, his face more serious than she had seen it in days. "Claire," he said, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately, about us, about what happened, and I've come to a realization." Claire paused, her hand still on the doorknob. She turned to face him, her eyes steady, waiting for him to continue. There was something in his gaze that told her this wasn't just another apology or another attempt at closure. This was different. "I don't expect anything from you, Claire," Greg said, his voice quiet but sincere. "But I want you to know that I see you now, really see you. And I know I'll never be able to fix what I've done. I've tried to make sense of it all, tried to understand why I did what I did, and I've realized something. You weren't the problem, Claire. I was. I was lost, and I thought I could fix it by running away, but all I did was lose you and myself in the process." His words hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. Claire felt her breath catch in her chest, not from surprise, but from something else. She had heard him apologize before, but this time it wasn't just about regret. It was about understanding. Greg had finally come to terms with his own shortcomings, and in doing so, he had let go of the need to ask for her forgiveness. It was almost as if he had finally let her go too. Claire stayed silent for a moment, letting his words settle into the space between them. She had already forgiven him, not for him, but for herself. And now, hearing him speak so openly about his own journey, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't expected. It wasn't about him making things right anymore. It was about her being at peace with where they were now. "I think you've said everything you need to say, Greg," Claire replied, her voice steady. "And I think I've said everything I needed to say, too. What happened in the past, the hurt, the betrayal, it's all part of our story. But it doesn't define us anymore. It's over, and we've both moved on." Greg nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no more anger, no more resentment in his gaze, just a quiet acceptance. He had finally let go, just as she had. And in that moment, Claire realized that she had been waiting for this, not for him to come back to her, not for some grand gesture of redemption, but for him to truly understand. She had waited for the day when he could see her, not as the woman he had wronged, but as the woman she had become. "I guess I'm not sure what comes next," Greg said, his voice low. "But I know that whatever it is, I'll never forget what you did for me, what you gave me, and I'll always be grateful for that." Claire smiled softly, though it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding. She had given him everything she could, and in return she had found something far more important than forgiveness. She had found herself. "You don't need to be grateful, Greg," she said, her voice gentle. "I did what I did because I wanted to, because it was the right thing to do, and I'm okay with that. You're right. Whatever comes next, that's for us to figure out separately." With that, Claire stepped through the door, closing it softly behind her. The moment she left, the weight of the past seemed to lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just walking away from Greg, she was walking into her future, a future that no longer needed to be defined by him or their shared history. As she drove home, Claire reflected on the months that had passed, the heartbreak, the healing, and the unexpected reconciliation that had taken place. She had learned so much in this journey. She had learned that letting go wasn't a sign of weakness, but of strength. That forgiveness wasn't about excusing the wrongs of the past, but about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. And most importantly, she had learned that her happiness, her peace, her future, those were hers to build and no one else's to take away. The city streets outside her window blurred as she thought of all the possibilities ahead. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years, she was excited to find out. Said, as the days turned into weeks, Claire's life continued its steady rhythm, one that felt like it was truly hers. She had finally settled into a sense of peace that she had once thought impossible. The journey from heartbreak to healing had been long and challenging, but now, standing on the other side of it, Claire felt stronger than ever. She spent her days seeing patients, offering them the same understanding and guidance she had used to pull herself from the depths of despair. It wasn't just her career that flourished, it was her life as a whole. She took up new hobbies, reconnected with friends she had neglected during her marriage, and for the first time truly enjoyed her own company. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Claire sat on her balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city come alive as night fell. It was moments like this that reminded her how far she had come, how much she had reclaimed her life. The soft hum of the city, the flickering lights, the cool air on her face, it all felt so right. She didn't need anyone else to complete her. She had learned to find fulfillment within herself. Just as Claire took another sip of her wine, her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a message from her old friend Lisa, someone Claire hadn't seen in years. The message was simple, yet it brought an unexpected rush of warmth. "Claire, I've been thinking about you. Let's catch up soon. I'd love to see you again. There's so much to talk about." Claire smiled as she read the message, a small part of her feeling excited about the prospect of reconnecting. She had always valued her friendships, but they had taken a back seat while she had focused on her marriage and then, later, her work. But now, life felt more balanced. She had the space to let people in again. With a few quick taps, Claire typed a response. "I'd love that, Lisa. It's been far too long. Let's make plans." As she sent the message, a sense of contentment settled over her. It wasn't just the fact that she was rebuilding old relationships. It was the fact that she was doing it for herself, not to fill a void, or because she felt obligated. It felt right, in a way that had nothing to do with Greg or anyone from her past. The following weekend, Claire met Lisa at a small cafe they used to frequent. It was an unassuming place with vintage decor and the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. As soon as Lisa walked in, Claire stood to greet her, and they shared an enthusiastic hug. "You look amazing," Lisa exclaimed, pulling back to take a good look at Claire. Claire laughed softly, feeling a warmth in her chest that wasn't just from the praise. "Thanks. I've been doing a lot of work on myself, you know." Lisa nodded knowingly, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I can tell. You've always had a quiet strength, but now you've got this whole new energy about you. What's been going on? Tell me everything." And so Claire did. She shared the ups and downs of the past few years, but she didn't linger on the hurt. She focused on the transformation, on how she had learned to forgive, not just Greg but herself, how she had embraced her independence, her career, and most importantly, her ability to find peace without relying on someone else's validation. "I've learned a lot about what it means to truly live," Claire said, her eyes shining with conviction. "It's not about waiting for things to fall into place. It's about making them fall into place on your own terms, and that's exactly what I'm doing." Lisa smiled warmly, placing her hand over Claire's. "I'm so proud of you. I knew you had it in you. You always were the strong one, even when you didn't know it yourself." Claire felt her heart swell with gratitude. The past few years had taught her the importance of surrounding herself with people who truly saw her, who understood her journey and respected her growth. She had come to realize that healing wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about embracing the future with all its uncertainties and possibilities. As the conversation drifted into lighter topics, Claire realized just how much she had missed this connection. She had been so consumed by her marriage, then by the aftermath, that she had lost touch with the people who truly mattered. Reconnecting with Lisa felt like an affirmation of the life she was building. It wasn't about going back to what she had, but about moving forward with the lessons she had learned. By the time they said their goodbyes, Claire felt a renewed sense of excitement about what was to come. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, she could honestly say that she was looking forward to the future, whatever it might hold. As she walked back to her apartment, Claire couldn't help but think about how far she had come. The pain that had once defined her had become a part of her story, but it no longer had control over her. The love she had given to Greg, the heartache she had endured, the lessons she had learned, all of it had shaped her, but it was no longer the driving force in her life. She was the one now in control of her own happiness. And with that realization, Claire knew that the best was yet to come. Inued to roll by, and Claire's life blossomed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her practice was thriving, she had new clients, and her work was more fulfilling than ever. There were days when it felt as though the weight of the past had lifted completely, and she was walking in a new light, her steps lighter, her heart steadier. She wasn't just moving forward, she was living fully in the present, relishing every moment of freedom she had fought for. Yet, no matter how much she had healed, there were still moments when she found herself thinking about Greg. It wasn't out of longing or unresolved emotion, but rather out of curiosity. The man who had left her, who had once been the center of her world, was now just another part of her past. And though she had no desire to go back to what they once shared, there were times when she couldn't help but wonder where his journey had taken him. One evening, as Claire sat at her desk reviewing a client's case notes, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Greg. At first, she hesitated, unsure of what he could possibly want now. They hadn't spoken much since that last conversation, and Claire had intentionally kept her distance, knowing that there was nothing left to discuss. But curiosity got the better of her, and she opened the message. "Claire, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you and what we talked about. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. You helped me in ways I'm not sure I can fully express. I understand now that I can't change the past, but I've worked hard to change myself. I'm in a better place, and I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for everything. I hope you're happy." For a moment, Claire just stared at the message. There was no pleading, no expectation for anything in return, just a man who had truly come to terms with his mistakes. And in some way, that realization stirred something in her, not for Greg, but for herself. She had fought so long for closure, for an apology, for some sign that he understood the hurt he had caused. And now she had it, not in the form she expected, but in the form that mattered most. He had truly changed. He had let go of the past, and so had she. She took a deep breath and with a steady hand typed her response. "I appreciate your message, Greg. I'm glad to hear that you're in a better place. We've both come a long way, and I'm happy for you too. I've found my peace, and I hope you continue to find yours." With that, she sent the message and sat back in her chair. The tension that had once existed between them, the unresolved feelings, seemed to dissipate. In that moment, Claire realized something profound. She had needed closure from Greg, yes, but she had also needed to learn how to give that closure to herself. It wasn't about him giving her permission to move on. It was about her giving herself the freedom to truly let go. The days that followed felt even lighter. It was as though the final thread that had still bound her to the past had been severed. She no longer felt like a woman defined by betrayal or loss. She was Claire, a woman with her own story, her own strength, and her own future to shape. Greg had played a part in that story, yes, but he no longer had any claim to the narrative of her life. As Claire focused more on herself, her career, and the relationship she had begun to rebuild, something unexpected began to bloom in her heart. A few months after reconnecting with Lisa, Claire had started to venture out more. She went to new places, joined new groups, and found herself surrounded by people who celebrated her, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration for the person she had become. And then there was someone else, a man named Ben. He was a writer, a fellow therapist who worked with couples, and he had become a regular in the cafe where Claire liked to spend her Sunday mornings. Their conversations had started casually, just shared moments over coffee, discussing everything from books to life's oddities. But something about Ben made Claire smile in a way she hadn't smiled in a long time. It wasn't that he was some grand romantic figure. It was simply that he brought a sense of ease, a peaceful energy that made her feel alive in ways she hadn't expected. They'd spent more time together, talking, laughing, sharing stories, and Claire realized that, in his quiet way, Ben was teaching her how to open up again. There were no grand gestures between them, not yet at least, but there was something there, a quiet connection that Claire couldn't ignore. It wasn't love yet, but it was the spark of something new, something that didn't come with the baggage of past mistakes, of old wounds. It was something that felt entirely possible and free of the shadows that had once lingered over her. For the first time in what felt like forever, Claire was excited by the possibilities ahead of her. She wasn't waiting for the perfect man to come along, nor was she hoping for some fairy tale ending. She wasn't waiting for anything. She was living her life as it came, enjoying the present, savoring the moments that felt right, and embracing whatever came next. As Claire sat in her favorite cafe one afternoon, chatting with Ben about a book they both loved, she realized something. She wasn't searching anymore, not for validation, not for closure, and not for someone to make her whole. She had already found everything she needed within herself, and for the first time, Claire was ready to embrace a future that was completely hers. Life continued to unfold in a way that felt almost surreal to Claire. It had been over a year since she'd seen Greg, and although they had exchanged a few more messages after their last conversation, Claire could feel the distance between them growing with each passing day. She had no desire to revisit the past, nor did she long for any sort of rekindled friendship with him. The chapter they had shared had closed, and she had accepted that. But in the silence of her heart, Claire had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about creating something new in place of what had been lost. The journey wasn't a straight line, and there were still days when she would wake up with a lingering feeling of emptiness, a subtle ache that reminded her of the love she had once given so fully. But those feelings no longer consumed her. They were fleeting, and each time they appeared, she found herself better equipped to handle them. One evening, after another long day of seeing clients and working on her latest project, Claire sat on her balcony with a glass of wine, watching the last rays of sunlight dip behind the skyline. It was a peaceful moment, one she had grown accustomed to, the kind of quiet that allowed her to reflect without feeling overwhelmed. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was from Ben. "Hey Claire, are you free tomorrow night? I found this amazing new restaurant downtown. Thought we could try it together." Her heart gave a small flutter, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of excitement. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something more tangible, a connection that had grown from nothing into something genuine. The thought of spending time with Ben no longer felt like an obligation or a distraction. It felt right. With a smile, she quickly typed back, "Sounds perfect. I'm in." As she set her phone down, Claire couldn't help but think about how far she had come. A year ago, she would have hesitated to say yes, afraid of opening up again, afraid of what might happen if she allowed herself to feel something for someone new. But now, with the passage of time, she had learned to embrace these moments, not because she needed them to heal, but because they were part of the life she was building, a life that was hers, free from the shadows of her past. The dinner with Ben was everything Claire had hoped for and more. They arrived at the restaurant, a cozy little place with warm lighting and a welcoming ambiance. The menu was a perfect blend of familiar and new, and as they sat down to enjoy their meal, the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was something easy about being with Ben, something that made her feel comfortable in her own skin. They talked about everything and nothing, from their favorite books to the struggles they faced in their respective careers. But what Claire noticed most was how natural it felt to laugh with him, to be in the moment without the baggage of past relationships weighing her down. There was no pressure, no expectation, just two people enjoying a pleasant evening together. It was exactly the kind of connection Claire had been craving, one where she didn't have to prove anything to anyone. As the night wore on, they shared dessert and continued to talk long after the restaurant had begun to empty. Claire felt a lightness in her chest, a spark of something new, something that didn't come with the weight of her past. For the first time in a long time, she was beginning to see the possibility of what might be, not as a means of filling a void, but as an extension of everything she had learned about herself. When they finally left the restaurant, Ben walked Claire to her car, his hand brushing against hers as they said goodnight. The moment was simple, but there was something undeniably comforting about it, a soft promise that maybe things were unfolding exactly as they were meant to. "Thanks for tonight, Claire," Ben said, his voice warm and genuine. "I really enjoyed this." "Me too," Claire replied, her voice light. "I'm looking forward to doing it again soon." As she drove home that night, Claire couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't just about Ben, or even about the dinner they had shared. It was about the realization that she was finally open to the future, open to what might come, without fear or hesitation. She was living, truly living, in a way that had once felt impossible. For the first time in a long time, Claire allowed herself to acknowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be. The weeks following that dinner with Ben were filled with the kind of quiet joy Claire hadn't realized she was missing. It wasn't anything overwhelming, nothing that swept her off her feet or led to wild, dramatic moments. It was more like a steady, comforting presence, an easy connection that grew naturally, like a friendship blossoming into something more. They spent weekends exploring new cafes, taking walks in the park, and sharing quiet evenings at Claire's apartment where they'd cook dinner together and talk about anything that came to mind. Claire had always believed that life was about finding balance, and with Ben she found that. She didn't need him to complete her, she didn't need him to heal her. She was already whole, already content with the life she had built. But with Ben, there was a sense of shared understanding, a partnership that didn't feel like it was being rushed or forced. And as much as Claire appreciated the simplicity of their relationship, there were moments when she found herself wondering if she was ready for more. Was she ready to open up fully to someone again? To trust someone with all of the pieces of herself, even the parts that had been broken? She had been so focused on healing, on reclaiming her independence, that the thought of truly sharing her heart with another person felt both exciting and terrifying. One evening, as they sat together on Claire's balcony, sipping wine and watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Ben spoke up. "Claire," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I've been thinking about us, about how easy it is to be with you, and I wanted to know, where do you see this going?" The question caught Claire off guard. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about it, but hearing it out loud from Ben made her realize just how much she had been holding back. She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of uncertainty, but all she saw was genuine affection, the kind that made her heart beat a little faster. I think I'm ready to see where this goes," Claire replied, her voice steady, though her heart fluttered with the possibility of it all. "I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm not afraid of it anymore. And I want to see where we can go together. No expectations, just us." Ben smiled, and in that moment, Claire knew that whatever happened next, she had found something she hadn't been looking for. Not because she needed it, but because it was exactly what she deserved, a connection built on mutual respect, shared joy, and the freedom to grow together without fear. And for the first time in a long time, Claire felt truly ready to embrace what the future held. The days following that conversation with Ben were filled with a new kind of anticipation, the kind that arises when something new and meaningful begins to take shape. Claire had always prided herself on being independent, on having built a life that was hers and hers alone. But now with Ben, she felt the exciting possibility of sharing that life with someone not as a need or a dependency, but as a partnership. They continued to spend time together, but there was a subtle shift between them. It wasn't dramatic, no grand declarations or sweeping gestures, but rather a gentle deepening of their connection. Claire found herself looking forward to their time together more than she had expected. It wasn't just the comfort of familiarity or the pleasure of good company. It was something more. Ben had become a part of her life not by necessity, but by choice, and she realized that she was beginning to see him not as a distraction from her past, but as a possibility for her future. One evening, as they sat together on the couch after dinner, Ben turned to her with a thoughtful look in his eyes. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "you've changed in ways that I can see. You're not the same person you were when we first met. You're stronger, more you." One evening, as they sat together on the couch after dinner, Ben turned to her with a thoughtful look in his eyes. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "you've changed in ways that I can see. You're not the same person you were when we first met. You're stronger, more you." Claire smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I think we all change, Ben, especially when we go through the things we've been through. The important part is learning how to embrace that change, not fight it. Ben nodded, clearly reflecting on her words. It's just that I see so much more of you now. The person you've become, it's amazing. Claire felt her heart swell, and she realized that, in many ways, Ben had seen her at her most vulnerable, at her lowest point, and he had never once made her feel anything less than worthy of love. It was a rare gift, one that she didn't take for granted. She had learned so much about herself in this relationship, not just about who she was before, but about who she was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what that future might hold. As they sat there, the soft hum of the city just beyond the window, Claire's mind drifted to the place she had come from, the place where she had once been broken, shattered by betrayal and loss. That woman, the one who had been lost in the aftermath of Greg's abandonment, was no longer her. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece until she was whole again, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. And now with Ben, she was ready to embrace something new, not because she needed it, but because she wanted it. I'm glad you see me, Claire said, her voice soft but certain. It's not always easy to see yourself when you've been through so much, but I think I finally figured out who I am. Ben smiled, his eyes warm and understanding. I see you, Claire, and I'm happy I get to be a part of that. For the first time in a long time, Claire felt the weight of her past lift completely. There was no more looking back, no more wondering about what might have been. There was only the present and the future that lay ahead of her, and she was ready for it, whatever it might bring. A few months passed, and the changes in Claire's life continued to unfold in ways that surprised her. She found herself growing more comfortable with the idea of being in a relationship with Ben, not as a way to fill a gap in her life, but as a natural extension of the person she had become. She still treasured her independence, her career, and the life she had built, but she now understood that partnership didn't mean sacrificing who she was. It meant finding someone who complimented her, who respected her individuality, while offering love and companionship in return. One Saturday afternoon, Claire and Ben decided to take a weekend trip to the coast. It was a quiet getaway, the kind that didn't require much planning or fanfare, just a weekend by the ocean with good company and no distractions. They rented a small beach house, one with large windows that overlooked the water, and spent their days walking along the shore, collecting seashells, and talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of their walks, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, that Claire realized just how far she had come. Standing next to Ben, feeling the cool sea breeze on her face, Claire looked out at the waves crashing against the shore. It was a simple moment, but it felt monumental. She was no longer the woman who had been broken by betrayal. She was no longer defined by the past. She was Claire, a woman who had faced hardship, yes, but who had come out stronger on the other side. And now, standing there with Ben, she knew that she was ready to embrace whatever came next. I've never been this at peace, Claire said softly, her voice almost lost in the sound of the waves. Ben turned to her, his gaze gentle. I'm glad you're at peace, Claire. You deserve it. And in that moment, Claire realized that the peace she had found was not just from the life she had rebuilt or the love she had learned to give herself, but from the acceptance of her own journey. She had come so far, learned so much, and now, with Ben by her side, she felt truly whole. As they continued their walk along the beach, hand in hand, Claire smiled to herself, knowing that no matter where life took her, she was no longer afraid of what the future held. She had learned to trust herself, and in doing so, she had learned that she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined, and with that realization she felt ready for everything the future would bring. As the months passed, Claire's relationship with Ben continued to grow in depth and understanding. What had started as a simple connection, born out of mutual respect and shared experiences, had transformed into something neither of them had expected. They supported each other in ways that felt natural, without the need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. It wasn't that they didn't care for each other deeply. It was that the relationship was rooted in something far more genuine, mutual trust, deep affection, and the space to be who they were, both individually and together. Claire found herself spending more time with Ben, but not in the way she had once feared. She wasn't losing herself in him. Instead, they were discovering new aspects of each other. Ben didn't complete her, nor did she need to complete him. They were two whole individuals, navigating the world side by side, growing at their own pace, but always meeting in the middle when it mattered. They were partners, not because they needed each other, but because they chose each other, each day, each moment. It wasn't just about love, it was about life. They had shared stories, aspirations, and dreams, and in each one they found a piece of the other. Ben had encouraged Claire to push further in her career, reminding her that her strength wasn't just in how she cared for others, but in how she pursued her passions, and Claire had helped Ben open up in ways he hadn't before, teaching him that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a strength. Together, they had become a team in every sense of the word. One evening, after a quiet dinner at home, as they sat on the couch, Ben took Claire's hand. His touch was soft but sure, and as he looked at her, she could feel the weight of the unspoken words in the air. It wasn't surprising. Lately, their conversations had begun to shift toward the future. They both understood that life was fluid, ever-changing, and they weren't rushing to define anything. But tonight, the moment felt different. There was a quiet certainty between them, a feeling of mutual understanding that seemed to fill the space around them. "Claire," Ben began, his voice calm and steady, "I've been thinking about us a lot lately, about everything we've built together. And I just want you to know I'm happy, more than I ever thought I could be. You've shown me what it means to truly live in the moment, to appreciate the small things, and to embrace all the messiness of life. And I want you to know that I'm here with you, in whatever way that looks like for us." Claire's heart swelled at his words. There was no pressure, no expectation. Just a man who had seen her, truly seen her, and who, in return, had allowed her to see him. She knew without a doubt that this was what it meant to be loved and to love freely, without any fear of losing oneself in the process. "I feel the same way, Ben," Claire replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You and I were building something beautiful, something real, and I'm not afraid of where it will take us." In that moment, Claire realized that she had come full circle. The woman who had once been lost in the wreckage of a broken relationship had finally found her way, not by clinging to the past or by waiting for some perfect future, but by living in the present, embracing the possibilities that life had to offer. And with Ben by her side, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next. Years passed, and the life Claire had built for herself continued to evolve. She and Ben had traveled together, explored new opportunities, and had faced challenges that tested their bond. But through it all, they remained a team. Their love wasn't a fairy tale, it wasn't a perfect, seamless narrative, but it was real, and it was theirs. And that, Claire realized, was more than enough. She had come to understand that happiness wasn't a destination, it was a journey. It wasn't something that could be found in someone else or in the achievement of some grand milestone. It was something that resided within in the quiet moments of self-assurance and peace that came from knowing who she was. Claire had built her life from the ground up, learning to live fully, to forgive, to trust again, and to love not just others, but herself. One day, while sitting in a sunlit cafe with Ben talking about their next adventure, Claire felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. She wasn't looking back anymore. She wasn't clinging to the past or wondering what could have been. She was exactly where she needed to be. With Ben, yes, but more importantly, with herself. She had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about accepting each other's flaws and imperfections, growing together, and finding joy in the simple act of being present. In that moment, as she looked at Ben, she realized that her journey had been long, but it had brought her to a place of peace, of acceptance, and of love, not just for him, but for herself. And as they left the cafe, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held, Claire knew that her story wasn't finished. It was just beginning. And this time, she was ready to embrace it with open arms, knowing that no matter what came next, she was no longer afraid. She was whole. She was free. And she was ready for the next chapter of her life.